with Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. All right, great to have you here. First, let me lay out the ground rules for this town hall and how we're going to conduct this, and then we'll get started. So we asked you guys for questions, and boy, did you give us questions. So a ton of them came in. We've got some great ones here. My role here is to ask follow-ups. The questions will come largely from the audience at home, some in the form of videos, including from our TYT Network partners on YouTube, and also from the audience here at YouTube Space LA. And I want to thank YouTube Space LA for hosting us here. And I want to thank the Young Turks members for making all of this possible. tytnetwork.com/join, of course. And here's the interesting part of how we're going to do things a little differently. You guys are allowed to react. Okay. And of course, what we're trying to determine here is, with less than 3 weeks to go, who are you going to vote for? And so it's great to have Dr. Stein here to help us understand her positions more fully. And you guys have asked some great policy questions, so I want to get to it. First of all, Dr. Stein, thank you for being here. I know you basically just got out of the hospital. So a real trooper here. Are you okay?
Wild horses couldn't keep me away.
It wasn't the same pneumonia as Hillary Clinton, right?
Well, I don't know. There may be a new thing called female candidate pneumonia.
All right, I'm going to leave the Trump joke out. All right, so let's get started. I want to start with Matt Horman, who wrote in with this question. I don't think you're going to be surprised given what happened on Sunday. What did HBO comedian John Oliver get wrong about your plan to cancel student debt?
What he got wrong, quite simply, was that student debt is eminently cancelable. If we could bail out Wall Street to the tune of $16 trillion, the crooks who crashed the economy through their waste, fraud, and abuse, it's about time we bailed out the victims of that waste, fraud, and abuse, our younger generation. There are many ways that we can do that. In fact, their office had, John Oliver's producers had called us, and we made it very clear that there are many ways we can do this. One way is through this fancy thing called quantitative easing, which is controversial, but there are many other ways. Instead of paying for an entirely new generation of nuclear weapons, which costs about as much as student debt, how about instead we cancel those nuclear weapons, and instead we pay for a generation of young people that deserve to be unleashed from these chains of endless debt. So quite simply, there are many ways that this can be done. And I would just say to John Oliver, are you part of the Hillary Clinton Protection Network? There are a lot of jokes that could be made about Hillary Clinton, but I don't see them coming from John Oliver's show.
Alfredo Alvarez also wrote in basically a follow-up to this question. He said, can you go into detail on how you plan to cancel student debt, which you partly did there, including which departments would be involved, how you would deal with any adverse effects on the economy caused by eliminating over $1 trillion in debt?
Actually, it would be the stimulus package of our dreams. So, it's not so much having the technical details here of the plan as it is having the actual intention to do it. The weak link here is not having an ad nauseum detailed plan. These plans get ripped up all the time. The critical issue here is whether our elected officials are actually serving the people of America or whether they are serving their financial overlords and their corporate sponsors. So, getting rid of $1 trillion worth of debt means that instead that money is actually going into the economy. It means that an entire generation of young people, instead of working part-time, low-wage, temporary jobs that lead to nowhere, instead they actually get released to do what it is they've been trained for, what they have their degrees in, where their passion is. Every generation has to lead the way forward to the economy of the future, and we badly need to liberate that generation to lead the way forward now.
But Alfredo, does have a really good question in that, and I really want to just go into it just a little bit more there. So I want to understand the mechanics behind it. So folks took out loans to go to school, and when we cancel it, does that mean that we are going to the banks and basically paying off those loans?
So the language we use actually is bailout, so that the most likely way to do this is through Congress. And how does Congress decide to do that? That's because if we had an organizer-in-chief in the White House, we would actually have the offices of our congressmen and women overflowing with passionate people who are instructing our representatives how to represent us. So the bottom line is that Congress appropriates that money, which would be about $1 trillion, a little bit more than that, and it could be over a period of 2 or 3 years. And that money basically is used to pay off that debt. So that, in other words, Congress purchases that debt as an investment in our most valued resource, our younger generation.
So it's not like the banks who have the loans don't get paid. They do get paid, but they get paid by the Treasury.
That's right,
The quantitative easing would involve the Fed. That would be a different route altogether.
That would be a very different route, in which the Fed would basically digitally create money, which is what the Fed did in order to bail out Wall Street. The Fed could digitally create that money in order to buy the loans that the students have. And then the Fed could choose to consider that an investment in our future as well. That is much more controversial. Jeremy Corbyn calls this people's quantitative easing. And that's what it would be. It would be the Fed creating money on behalf of the American people instead of creating money digitally on behalf of bailing out the banks, for example.
Since there's been a lot of questions about that, I'm just going to do one last follow-up on the quantitative easing part. So when the Fed does that for banks, you're right, they digitally create money, but they buy the bank's assets, which theoretically they could later sell, although that is a bizarre situation, and I'm not sure they've ever sold any of those assets. In this case, they would be buying the loans that the students have, that they're buying it from the banks.
That's right.
But then they would presumably never sell them, which would be different than the bank situation where they could sell them.
And my understanding is that the banks actually did repay those loans because banks are set up to be able to do that. They're loaned money at virtually 0 interest rates, and they just turn right around and they loan it out at 7 or 10% or whatever they decide. So they are eminently enabled by our financial system to generate money out of thin air, really, and out of consumer debt. That's what they do. But that system's not working for us. And actually, the Constitution gives the American government the power to create that money. That power was turned over to the Fed in the early 1900s. Abraham Lincoln used that power in order to create the greenback, which is how the Civil War was fought, on the basis of that federally created money. So, you know, if we really want to go into the policy wonk details, it's fascinating, and there's a lot of room that in which we could explore this. Yeah. But, you know, for the purposes of a town hall forum and a political campaign, that's really, you know, it's not the time to be educating, but it's definitely a discussion that is long overdue and that we, the American people, need to think about. Who is it that controls our currency and who should be in charge?
Yes. That's actually, the only part I'll disagree with is that's actually why we do the town halls, because I think it is really instructive. I think that it's interesting that the mainstream media hasn't asked the two so-called major candidates, no, to be fair, they are the major candidates, they're leading the polls now, about do they support the Federal Reserve digitally creating money in terms of quantitative easing? That's never been asked. Yeah. And so I haven't seen any satirical pieces on that, hey, why are we digitally creating money? Why are we buying these assets? What are we going to do with these assets? So I think that third parties actually create a situation where we begin to ask those interesting questions. So I'm glad that we dove into it. But now let's move on to the next topic. So this one, we've got a video from Scott Boylan, and he wanted to ask you about the military.
With the Department of Defense spending $47 million to build a $500,000 gas station in Afghanistan, and the U.S. Army not being able to account for over $6 trillion in spending, is this negligence or is it corruption? Also, what do you plan to do to assure that our tax monies are spent correctly and also efficiently to achieve our goals?
So I didn't catch one critical word. Is it something or is it corruption?
Yeah, so he said, is it just being inefficient, basically, or do you think it's actual corruption?
It's hard to know how we would sort that out, you know, when the Pentagon is essentially unaccountable. But there's no doubt that our system is unofficially corrupted, if not officially corrupted. And by that, what I mean is that, you know, as President Eisenhower had warned us about the power of the military, industrial, congressional Congress to buy policy and determine policy, that's clearly, you know, what's going on. And enormous amounts of money are contributed not only to Congress, but also to the major presidential candidates. And, you know, they are constantly fulfilling the needs of the war profiteers to gin up enemies and to create wars in order to maintain this budget. And in terms of efficiency in our budget, you know, there are many areas where efficiency can be brought to bear. But just focusing on the military, that is the biggest one. It's more than half of our discretionary budget. It's almost half of your income taxes right now that go to this bloated military. It's not a Department of Defense, it's a Department of Offense. And what is its track record? It is creating failed states, mass refugee migrations, and worse terrorist threats. According to a Harvard study recently, we've spent $6 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan alone. By the time you include the ongoing health care costs of our wounded soldiers, that's the least we can do for them, and we should be doing much more for them. But the point is that's $6 trillion, and you know, it's basically gone up in smoke. So there are very different ways forward. We're calling for a peace offensive in the Middle East, and for a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy, and cutting our military budget so that it's truly a defense department, not an offense department.
So Ronald Wolf also sent in a question on this topic, and I think it serves as a good follow-up to Scott's question. How would you scale down the Pentagon budget and control corrupt contracting practices while convincing Americans, our allies, and others that we are prepared to defend ourselves if necessary? Great.
So, you know, one way that we scale things down is, you know, we have a pay-to-play rule, you know? And not only do we scale down the size of the budget, but we also scale down the influence peddling in that budget, you know? If the rules of the game eliminated those who are buying influence from actually capturing those contracts, then, you know, we would see a very different Department of Defense. That's one way to weed it out. Another way to weed it out is let's just put an end to the revolving door so that people are not moving from the industries into the Department of Defense, you know, or into other areas that determine the contracting. So it's not so much how do we do this, you know. In my view, how we do this is by building a strong political alternative that demands that there's a different way forward. And in terms of convincing people that it's safe, you know, I'd say let's start by having a public discussion. Why is it that the Democrats and Republicans insisted, you know, on silencing political opposition? Because they know that their proposals do not stand up to the light of day, that these policies of endless militarism, we've been at war in Afghanistan now for 16 years. Every war we have conducted as part of this cycle of war on terror, every one has been a shocking failure. Every so-called terrorist entity that we've been fighting has only gotten stronger, has conquered more territory, has been turned into a global movement. This strategy of brute military force is a massive and catastrophic failure. It needs to have the light of day shined on it, and people need to know that there is another way forward. And that begins with a weapons embargo on the Middle East, since we are the major supplier of weapons excuse me, to parties on all sides. We can begin this embargo, quite effectively. I believe we could bring the Russians on board because they too are struggling to handle the costs of their military budget. They too are struggling with the consequences of unbridled terrorist extremism. That blows back at them equally. So there's a very different path forward here. It starts with a weapons embargo, and then it moves to freezing the bank accounts of those countries who insist on funding terrorism. And the recent email leaks revealed that Hillary Clinton is well aware that the leading funder is none other than our good ally, Saudi Arabia. So we need to get clear with Saudi Arabia that we cannot simultaneously, with one hand, fight terrorism, while with the other hand, we and our allies are funding terrorism, training terrorism, and arming terrorism. We have to decide which way is it.
So now let's get really into the nitty-gritty of this issue and this area, because I think it's really important for people to know where you stand. So I'm sure that some would say, well, look, if you do that with Saudi Arabia, you're going to endanger our alliance with them. And if you do, there will be some consequences. And maybe we can live with those consequences. But one of them is likely the price of oil will go up. Because it appears that the deal we've made with the Saudis is you go do whatever you're going to do, but you keep OPEC under control and make sure that our gas prices aren't that high. Are you willing to say to the American people, yes, your gas prices might go up, but we need to do this deal?
Well, as a matter of fact, you know, if that were the issue, gas prices going up, simply the savings on our military budget, which remember is draining more than half of our discretionary budget, we have more than enough money to help subsidize that price of oil and ensure that there's not a significant rise. And the companion, actually, to our foreign policy is this call for an emergency green energy jobs program. So that we are becoming independent not only of fossil fuel from Saudi Arabia, which is currently a rather small part of the mix. We could make that up from Venezuela, for example, you know, who needs a market for their oil. And I'll bet they'd be willing to sell it to us really cheap. So there are many options here. The point is, you know, that these options should be defined by elected officials who are responsive to we the people, who do not owe their, their return favors to the fossil fuel industry, to the predatory banks, and to the war profiteers who are currently calling the shots.
So let's dive into the issue of Russia there then, because you brought that up. Obviously in Syria it's very relevant. Right now it appears that the Russians are helping the Syrian government pretty much decimate Aleppo. So I assume you're concerned about that. How do you deal with the Russians and try to persuade them to not do that?
It's important that we stop beating the war drum around Russia, which long preceded Syria. So, you know, we have sort of forced Russia into a very defensive posture. And you may recall that at the time that Germany was reunified, the promise was made to Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east of Berlin. Well, since then, NATO has been steadily moving to essentially surround Russia. Now we're conducting war games around Russia. We are dropping fake nuclear weapons in Nevada, preparing for this potential nuclear war, which Hillary Clinton is begging to start. And let's just be clear what it is that Hillary Clinton's policy on Russia is. It is essentially a virtual declaration of war. That is what will happen if Hillary Clinton proceeds with her plan to create a no-fly zone. That means we are shooting down Russian aircraft over Syria. So in my view, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who used to be the main proponent of US domination of the Middle East and Asia, he's kind of like the original neocon. He has changed his tune after decades of advising presidents. He's now changed his tune to say the future, the 21st century, is not about tough guy, bully in the schoolyard domination. It's actually about collaboration, and that we need to begin working out our common interests with Russia as well as with China and developing a collaborative way forward. As horrible as Aleppo is, Let's just remember that there was a ceasefire which the U.S. broke by bombing forces which were not moving around. They had been stationary there for quite some time. So it was really perceived as our intentional disruption of this ceasefire. This is not to say that we are the bad guys here, but rather that there are no bad guys and there are no good guys. We need to enter into dialogue here as part of the community of nations. There are many areas where we need to collaborate with Russia, not only to stop the disaster in Syria, but also on nuclear weapons and on climate change. These are incredible catastrophic threats to us all. If we had honest brokers rather than tools of the defense industry who were negotiating, and this is not to impugn John Kerry, because I think he's done a pretty reasonable job given the tools that he's been handed. But I think we could be handing our Secretary of State far better tools to work with. We could have a much more collaborative position with Russia.
So I think that everyone is clear that you would be on a much less war footing than either the Democrats or the Republicans. You want to roll that back. You think it's been counterproductive, as you've clearly explained here. What I want to understand is the parameters, Dr. Stein, of where you would use force. Mm-hmm. So let's take an example. In Syria, let's say we've got your intelligence officials come in, you're the president, and they say, we have Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Can we do a drone strike to kill him? What would you say?
Well, in my view, you may remember that Israel at one point got their hands on Adolf Eichmann, who had murdered 6 million Jews. They could have thought, wow, we got to get this guy. This is like the world's worst guy ever. We got to take him out. They did not take him out. They complied with international law. They captured him. They brought him through the agony of a trial, and he paid the ultimate price. In doing so, we upheld a system of international law. Either we are a world of laws or we are a world of bullies. Which is it going to be? I think we need to set the right example, and we need to go forward. Where I would use force is where international law allows us to use force, which is when we ourselves are under imminent threat of attack or we actually are under attack.
So just to be clear here, you would not do this drone strike on Baghdadi. Would you have special forces go in to try to extract them, as they kind of did with bin Laden before they executed him, as they did in Somalia with a warlord there? Or no, you're not going to send in special forces or the strike? No,
I think special forces are an acceptable option, in a policing action. That is different, from a violation of international law or an act of war. I think we need to uphold international law if we want to have a world that we can all live in.
So if there was a judgment against al-Baghdadi in an international tribunal, then you could send in special forces to, in essence, arrest them? I'm asking, I don't know.
Yeah, so, technically, I haven't looked at those rules, but if those indeed are internationally respected rules, then yes.
Okay.
But, drone strikes are an assassination program, and we know that they are wrong 9 times out of 10. And we also know that where drones have been used, they have been extremely effective in mobilizing the local population against us and becoming a recruiting tool for the very forces that we claim to be fighting. So no, I would not use drones as a weapon of war. It is not a surgical strike. It is a highly effective way to mobilize people against us.
One last question about Iraq and Syria. If our allies in Baghdad say, hey, these guys have not only taken Mosul and all the cities that they have, they're advancing on Baghdad. We really, really need your help. What would be your response?
I think this is why you don't want to get into sort of that kind of brinksmanship situation. This is why I think we need to act now, and we need to act now to engage a weapons embargo so that we have not only the U.S., but we also have the Russians and our allied forces. So much of ISIS's success now has been in part supported and fostered by our allies. We need to cut that means of support, the care and feeding of terrorist forces that is going on by the Saudis through their supply of weapons, through their funding, and through their training. This is why we need to cut it off now, because we might be able to hold Baghdad for weeks or even a year. But what the past 16 years has shown is that everywhere that we have won a victory, that victory has been reversed. We've seen Aleppo change hands 5 or 6 times. The same with Mosul. So are we going to just blindly continue this cycle that only creates worse violence? It's not only that this fails, it's that it creates the next generation of violence and terror, and we only dig ourselves in deeper.
All right, and one last question on foreign policy in this regard. If the Russians cross into Estonia, and there are rumblings where they say, well, there is a Russian minority within Estonia that needs to be protected. If they cross the border with Estonia, how would you react?
Well, this is why I would want to have a open line of communication with the Russians starting now, so that we ensure that that does not happen. And we're begging for that to happen by creating this sense of brinksmanship, by surrounding Russia with our nuclear weapons, with our missiles, and our troops, with NATO. Consider this. This is like the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse, on steroids. Plus, the Russians have also sent their troops now, thinking back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, they now have their troops along the Mexican border or the Canadian border. We would be going ballistic. So we need to start diffusing this situation right now and not wait until we're on the brink of a disaster.
Right, but you have questioned our NATO alliance before. So I understand what you're saying about your long-term plan, but right now, as they're watching this, across the world, if you become president, can Estonia be sure as a member of NATO that the U.S. would protect them?
Well, while we are a member of NATO, we are obliged by our treaty contracts. But I'll say that Andrew Bacevich, who was a high-ranking military officer, now a military historian, his argument is that let's let NATO take care of Europe. Remember, NATO was formed during the Cold War, and it had its counterpart in the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact no longer exists, nor does the Soviet Union. This is essentially a war budget in search of funding. We need a very different way forward. We need to explore how we can create a truly defensible U.S. foreign policy, not one that is creating catastrophic situations and robbing us, the American people, blind. And let me add one more thing. The $6 trillion that the Harvard study said we are paying for Afghanistan and Iraq. That $6 trillion comes down to $50,000 for everybody's household out there. You're all putting $50,000 just to pay off our current obligations on Iraq and Afghanistan. $50,000 per household. Is that something you would have chosen to do? I think a lot of people would have chosen otherwise. The discussion needs to be put in those terms. Are we going to have an endless and bottomless military budget that pays for endless catastrophic war? I don't think that's what the American people want.
I think that's near the average salary of an American worker. Mm-hmm. A year's salary for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's an interesting question for the audience at home on whether they would have approved that if they had known that. Okay, so now let's move on to energy. Nelson Amaya writes in, how do you plan on switching the United States from oil and coal-based energy to more renewable energy? Do you plan on gradually moving to more renewable sources or switching over quickly? And what will happen to the workers in the coal and oil industries?
Wonderful question, and that gets down really to the heart of the matter. We need an emergency transition because we have an emergency with the climate, and we also have an emergency with the economy. And actually, the oil and coal workers are in the middle of that emergency already, because the price of oil has gone down, because the price of fracking has gone down, that is natural gas, and because their health, their very survival is very much in the target hairs. When you walk into a job in the fossil fuel industry, your risk of dying actually goes up by 700% the moment you walk in the door. And that's just from acute injuries. That is from explosions, from fires, from equipment crashes, from motor vehicle accidents. So it's a very dangerous kind of job. And in my experience talking to these workers, they are hungrier than anybody for a different option, one that is good for them and good for their communities and good for the planet. They have just been put in this very uncomfortable position of being really intimidated into thinking that's the only kind of job that you can have. So the bottom line is, we need an emergency jobs program that will also solve the emergency of the climate crisis. It's not so complicated. We did this during the Great Depression. In our New Deal, which created jobs. Now we need jobs on an emergency basis that will transition our economy to 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. Not the end of the century, but in real time. And we also call for transitioning our food system as well, which is a major contributor to greenhouse gases and the climate crisis, and also calling for public transportation, renewably powered and energy efficient, as well as restoring our ecosystems. So the bottom line is, there is a job for everyone. This is truly an emergency. That's what the science is telling us. So this is an all-hands-on-deck situation. When Pearl Harbor was bombed at the outset of the Second World War, it took us 6 months, all of 6 months, to totally transform the economy to 25% of GDP based on the wartime effort. So if we could do that in 6 months, we can meet the emergency of climate change within the next 15 years, which is what we call for. And we call for the workers in the fossil fuel industry, as well as the communities that depend on that income, to be assured that they get a job. They are front and center in having that job at equivalent pay with equivalent benefits.
So let's get into the details there just a little bit more. So I understand the long-term plan. I think you explained it very well. I think they all understand it. In the short term, when it comes time, whenever that might be, would you physically actually shut down the coal mines and tell the coal companies, for example, that's it, you're not allowed to do this anymore?
So here's what the science tells us. And there was a report from Oil Change International about 2 weeks ago that said we have 17 years, folks. We need to zero out fossil fuels by then. And that's roughly the time frame that we've been calling for, by 2030, to have zeroed out the fossil fuels. But that means, that doesn't mean shutting down those jobs alone. That means on an emergency basis, it means putting people to work in the healthy equivalent jobs, creating solar energy and wind towers and public transportation, rapid rail and light rail and so on. So yes, it means we need to do that. So, that's what it's not like we have a choice. It's like, either we do that, or it's curtains, potentially within a matter of decades. And that's what the science is telling us now. Jim Hansen, who hasn't been wrong yet, his latest study says as soon as 2060, and others, say even 2050, that we are looking at 10, 20, 30 feet of sea level rise, which will be absolutely catastrophic. Let's not make bones about it. This is goodbye Manhattan, this is goodbye Florida, this is goodbye coastal population centers in the US and all over the world. So this is utter chaos and catastrophe, not to mention some 16 or so nuclear power plants located on the coast that are all going Fukushima. So get ready, not just for flooding, but for incredibly toxic flooding as we flood out our nuclear power, our oil refineries, our LNG plants, et cetera. This is not a crisis we want to deal with. So we need to do this. We can do this in a way that creates the jobs. The obvious question, where does the money come from? So those who spend a lifetime on this say that it would be approximately $500 billion to get this program up and running, and that's to create 20 million of these good wage jobs. And so that's $500 billion. which is essential for our survival. How we come up with that? Again, by having an organizer in the White House so that we flood the offices of our elected representatives and ensure that instead of investing $1 trillion a year in a bloated military-industrial security complex that's not making us safer, instead we spend a good portion of that money actually creating the Green New Deal. Or that we tax Wall Street. A tiny transaction tax of 0.2% would be creating almost $400 billion, practically enough to pay for the Green New Deal right then and there.
Okay, so I understand your analysis of where the money comes from. Let me just be perfectly clear, though. And some Northern European countries have done this, saying you're not allowed to have coal mines anymore in our countries. Or they've passed laws or proposed laws in that direction. So would you say no more coal mining in America, no more oil drilling in America?
Well, unfortunately, I wish we could negotiate with the science, but science doesn't negotiate, and neither does the climate. It doesn't, backpedal a little bit because you don't like the results, or because the fossil fuel-sponsored politicians, have an industry to protect. There's just as many jobs to be created. In fact, there are far more jobs to be created by doing what the science tells us we must do. The science is perfectly clear. We must zero out fossil fuels. Zero means zero. By 2030, maybe give or take a year or two, but even, most scientists would say we are really playing with fire not to have already embarked on this and to be well on our way right now. The EPA has the authority to protect our environment and to protect our health that depends on the environment. Since when is human extinction compatible with human health? It's not. In my view, it's within the purview of the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure that humanity does not go extinct. That means the EPA needs to be a part of this emergency transition as well.
We have someone in the audience here now who wants to ask you a question. John, what do we have?
Yes, we have a question from Justin Brown right here in LA. Right here. Hi, Justin.
Hi, Justin.
So you tend to receive criticism for having some pretty hardline and sand commitments to some pretty lofty goals, like you just mentioned, 100% renewable energy by 2030, universal health care, and of course, canceling the student debt. My question is, how committed are you to these goals, and are you willing to negotiate on some of them just for the sake of progress? And if you're not willing to negotiate, how do you plan on dealing with a Congress that's most likely going to hate your guts for being a party outsider, anti-establishment candidate? And if you are willing to negotiate, what are some policy details that you'd be willing to compromise?
Great. Okay. Yeah. Terrific question. So let me start with the piece about how will we deal with a Congress that doesn't get anything done in the first place, and now has an insurgent president that stands for the opposite of what they got elected to do. So let me say that if we were to turn the White House into a greenhouse, which would make the world a safer place, it would be a whole new ball game. And let me also say that this isn't like a totally far-fetched and outrageous thing to do. The political house of cards is falling down. They've created a media blackout because they know that this is a very dangerous moment for the political establishment. 76% of voters were clamoring for an open debate. We know that these are the most disliked and untrusted candidates ever in our history, and that even their own supporters don't really support them. They're mostly deathly afraid of the other candidate. So this is a house of cards in the process of falling down. The only question is, when is it going to happen? And from my point of view, the more organized we are, the quicker we will make this life-saving, civilization-saving transition happen. Now, let's just say word got out that student debt could actually be ended, that we could, in fact, create a bailout. There are 43 million young people right now who are held hostage in student debt with no way out in the foreseeable future. That is a winning plurality of the vote. If that word got out, enough people could actually turn out and not split the vote, but flip the vote. So I just want to lay out that it's not so far-fetched to think that we could actually have a democracy, that people could actually be informed that they have real choices out there. So let's imagine that there's a groundswell, and we find ourselves, we the people, for the first time in history, we have an organizer in chief. Well, remember, right now, who is it that's calling the shots in Congress? It is the lobbyists. If you didn't know that from just common sense, you could read any of the major studies out there, like the Gillens and Page out of Northwestern and Princeton, yada-da, that document that public opinion has almost a zero relationship to the agenda on Congress. They are busy doing the work of the predatory banks, et cetera. That's what they do. So if we had, they can do that because we, the public, are locked out. We don't know what's going on, very little. It comes to us in dribs and drabs through the corporate media. So there's not kind of an organizing strategy out there to coordinate the vast numbers of people that could be mobilized to end student debt, to pass health care as a human right, which, by the way, doesn't cost us anymore under Medicare for All. It just means we put health care dollars into health care, not into profiteering and bureaucracy and red tape. So in my view, this agenda is eminently doable if we, the people, are mobilized and we are flooding the offices of our representatives and insisting, so that there's kind of an organizing plan by the week. It's, hey, folks, here comes the bill to pass the Green New Deal. We need you to flood your elected, your reps' offices, your senators' offices with emails, phone calls, and show up if you can. We've done this before, like to stop the privatization of the internet. We've done this before to stop the 2013 bombing campaign of Syria. What they tell us, they tell us resistance is futile because they are quaking in their boots that we should discover how much power we have when we are organized. And that is the key. And in my view, that's how we win this election. Whether we're in the White House or we win the day by becoming that organized, unstoppable political power that we can be. In the words of Alice Walker, biggest way we give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. It's time for us to know that we have it and to start organizing like we have it.
Thank you, Justin. That leads fairly naturally into Mira Luna's question. She asked, between the campaign finance system, the economy, lobbyists, and their revolving doors, and our so-called democracy, the system seems rigged. How do you propose we change our government? It seems impossible to overcome.
Well, let me say, in Massachusetts, in my home state, we actually passed campaign finance reform. We actually got the big money out of politics. We created public financing, and we did it through a voter referendum because the legislature, 85% Democratic, refused to pass this bill. They wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. We, the people, got out a referendum. We passed it by an overwhelming majority. It was not hard to do. And once you begin public financing, then suddenly all the money in the world doesn't, it can't buy the election because then money is no longer in control. And a companion to this, by the way, should be freeing the media so that corporations no longer hold our public airwaves hostage to their profiteering. When we doing those two things, we actually re-engage the wheels of democracy. It's not rocket science. I should mention what happened when we passed public financing in Massachusetts was that the Democratic legislature repealed it on a voice vote. They stopped public financing because they did not want to have to run against real candidates with a politics of integrity. Not only did they can public financing, but they also refused to pass ranked choice voting, which is the other critical solution here. That's how they keep you locked in fear by always having a worser evil that makes them the inevitable, the candidate you have to support because you're terrified of something worse. Bottom line is, we can get out of this trap, but we have to do it ourselves. They are not going to hand us democracy on a silver platter. That's why it's so critical for us to reject this propaganda that tells us we are powerless. We are not powerless, we are powerful, and we actually have the numbers that we could turn this election on its head. By standing up against the power of money, we can mobilize the public will and enact the no-brainer solutions that are there within our reach to put an end to the revolving door, put an end to money in politics, and put an end to the stranglehold that the corporate media has over our democracy.
So let me go through quickly then a couple of questions on that issue. Are you in favor of a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics?
Absolutely.
What would that amendment say if, in your ideal world? What would it address?
Quite simply that Citizens United wasn't the only problem. Money in politics was firmly entrenched before then because of the Supreme Court, a series of decisions that really misinterpreted the Constitution, massively distorted it. We need to clarify beyond any shadow of a doubt that money is not speech, because these rulings are based on this outrageous idea that money is the equivalent of speech. If that were true, then the richer you are, the more you are entitled to free speech, and that 50% of the American population, you might as well just forget it right now, that it's $1 one vote, it's not one person one vote. What this amendment needs to say is that money is not speech, corporations are not people, and that we, the American people, have the right to democratically decide our future.
Hillary Clinton also says that she's in favor of a constitutional amendment and will propose in the first 30 days. Do you believe her?
Well, what Hillary Clinton says is that we need to get unaccountable money out of politics. That's all she actually pretends to support. Unaccountable money, what exactly is that? It's like, I think she's talking about dark money, but that makes it perfectly okay as long as the money is declared. So it's like saying our politicians can belong to corporations, they just have to wear the corporate logos on their sweaters. That's not okay. Democracy belongs to us, not to the big corporations that are running us over the cliff.
All right. Now, next we go to Terrion Vesey. He's a student, and the question is, when I tell people that I will vote for Jill Stein, I often hear, it's a wasted vote. You're voting for Trump. She has no chance to win. Polls show that the majority of your supporters come from potential Hillary Clinton voters. What do you say to convince people who don't want a Donald Trump presidency to vote for you instead of Hillary Clinton?
So polls also say that 4 out of 10 American voters will not vote, given the choices of Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So, what I would say is, are we saying that 4 out of 10 American voters, those who are being thrown under the bus, which is, it may be 4 out of 10 today, it will be 6 out of 10 tomorrow, it will be 8 out of 10 after that, we need to stand up. We need to stand up for our democracy. It's like, what exactly is the exit strategy here? Because it is a race to the bottom between the greater and the lesser evil. It's not only the terrible things that Donald Trump says, it's the awful things that Hillary Clinton actually does. It's not... There could be no more catastrophic wars out there than what she already single-handedly led the charge for in Libya. It's not acceptable to be bombing millions of Muslims and say that, oh no, Donald Trump, you cannot ban Muslims, but I, Hillary Clinton, I've bombed Muslims. That's not okay either. Hillary Clinton, is part of the Democratic Party's immigration policy, which has already done unfathomable human rights violations to immigrants. 3 million have been deported under this White House, and Hillary Clinton has been a part of that. In fact, she gave the thumbs up to the military coup in Honduras, which has led to the refugees, tens of thousands, pouring into this country, and Hillary Clinton saying, no, bar the gates, send those dangerous children back. That is unacceptable. The Republicans may be the party of hate and fear. The Democrats are the party of detention, deportation, and night raids. This is a race to the bottom between the greater evil and the lesser evil. And if we can't stand up now, remember, with each election, they both get worse. The Democrats, like the Republicans, become more corporatist, more militarist, and more imperialist. If we cannot begin to pull up now, when exactly are we going to interrupt this downward spiral? It's up to us. And remember, while Donald Trump's scumbag predator misogyny is creating a smokescreen right now, there are plans in the works for economic predators to win the day once Hillary Clinton wins the election. That is for Social Security to be privatized, and that is also for additional, all sorts of stuff. But in particular, there's another really bad one that I am not thinking of at the moment, but it will come to me. The point is that under Clinton, with Clinton's support, under Bill, with Hillary's support, we got NAFTA, exporting our jobs. We got the Wall Street meltdown with deregulation. Hillary Clinton has long been a servant for Wall Street, and she has said that, she's told Wall Street that they should be able to regulate themselves, that Dodd-Frank was just for show. She's been a big fan of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Bottom line here is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 times, shame on me. It's time for us, we the people, to stand up with the power that we have and reject the lesser evil, fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do. We have the power to create the world we deserve.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical here, and I understand if you don't want to answer because you're running against them, but I am intensely curious, so I'm going to ask it. If you and Gary Johnson and no one else is allowed into the race, and somebody says, you, Jill Stein, will pick between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump as to who will be president, who would you pick?
To my mind, the differences between them are not enough to save your job, to save your life, or to save the planet. We live in a democracy, and we have more than 2 deadly choices. In this election, we're not just deciding what kind of world we will have, but whether we will have a world or not going forward, in terms of the climate, in terms of endless and expanding war, in terms of the nuclear catastrophe that we are teetering on the brink of right now. I will not sleep well if Donald Trump is elected, but I will not sleep well with Hillary Clinton elected either, knowing that we could slip into World War III going nuclear at any moment, because Hillary has already effectively declared war on Russia. So I think this is not acceptable. We live in a democracy. Let's not allow them to make us forget that. We, the people, have the power. It's time for us to stand up and build that world that we deserve, that is within our reach.
All right, we're going to go to a video next. Kyle Kulinski is the host of Secular Talk and the TYT Network, and he had a policy question for you as well. Let's watch.
Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Stein. Kyle Kulinski here from Secular Talk. I have a question about the drug war.
Great.
So, in the war on drugs, over 160,000 people died in a literal war against the drug cartels. We've spent over $1 trillion since its launch. And drug use, at the same time, hasn't dropped at all. Now, on top of that, we know that alcohol prohibition made the mafia more powerful, We now know that drug prohibition makes the drug cartels more powerful. And also, a lack of regulation in the drug market, because it's a black market, leads to deaths. For example, Philip Seymour Hoffman with his bad batch of heroin that was laced with fentanyl. That was because of a lack of regulation, because the drug is illegal. So knowing all that, and knowing that somebody gets arrested for drug possession every 25 seconds in America, will you go as far as saying you support legalizing, taxing, and regulating all drugs? Not just marijuana, but all drugs, because we know that prohibition doesn't work.
So that's a great question. Across the board, without a doubt, I will definitely instruct the Drug Enforcement Agency to do something really radical, and that is to use science in determining what substances will and won't be listed as scheduled substances. So right off the top, marijuana and cannabis come off. Those are the workhorses of the entire underground drug economy, which basically then pulls the rug out from under this mafioso industry. I think we need to decriminalize drugs and to treat all drugs as a health issue, not as a criminal issue. So I would certainly, be on the same page here in that regard. As far as legalizing, taxing, and regulating all drugs, I think that needs more discussion and more study, but I think we can get 90% of the way to where we need to go, to dismantling this very dangerous industry, to ending this very dangerous drug war, and redirecting our resources where they need to go through, number one, legalizing marijuana, and number two, by essentially ending this outrageous war on drugs and treating drugs as a health issue.
Okay. Next topic. Edgar Velasquez asks, what specific changes would you make in the healthcare industry that would drive down costs and benefit both patients and healthcare professionals?
We need an improved Medicare for All plan that takes Medicare, it patches in some of the holes that have been knocked into it, like we need to cover pharmaceuticals, we need to be sure that chronic care is covered as well as acute care, and then we need to just immediately drop the age of eligibility to from the point of conception, actually. So you are covered cradle to grave, head to toe, your reproductive health care, your mental health care, every aspect of your care essentially gets covered, and it pays for itself in the savings. Right now, almost $500 billion every year is being paid essentially for pharmaceutical and health insurance industry profiteering. Instead, we put that money into actual health care itself. So this is an easy one. This is a win-win. It's just, let's start doing the right thing that every other developed nation around the world has managed to do. The cost of their care is about half of what we pay. They essentially stabilize the cost of healthcare, so you don't have this incredible healthcare inflation that we have. So this is a money saver going into the future, and it doesn't cost us a thing starting now.
Okay, now next, we're going to go to another video. It's Beck Gill. She's also part of the TYT network on YouTube, and she wanted to follow up on this topic.
Great.
Hi, I'm Beck Gill, producer of PsyQ on the Young Turks network. You've talked extensively on your concern about the corporate influence over US vaccine regulations. My question is, what evidence do you have that corporate influence has caused either the FDA or the CDC to make decisions that endanger American children's health?
Okay, actually, my issue is not simply corporate influence over vaccines. It's actually corporate influence over the FDA and all other regulatory bodies. And let me give you a piece of that evidence. Recently, several years back, there was a scandal regarding Vioxx. This was at a time when hundreds of millions of dollars was pouring in from the pharmaceutical industry in the form of lobbying and campaign contributions, because healthcare was being discussed at the time. Anyhow, there was knowledge at the time that Vioxx caused serious cases of heart disease and was actually causing injury in well over 100,000 people who were not being warned about this, and physicians were not being notified about this. The information was being kept secret, essentially, by the FDA study committee, which was going ballistic because they objected to this. This was coming from higher up in the FDA, that the real risks of Vioxx were being suppressed. After about 5 years, finally the truth came out, and people were appropriately warned. But this is a case in point of how the industry tampers with our regulatory agencies. Now, you can also look at the revolving door here. For example, Monsanto, which is supposed to be regulated by the FDA, has been in the very comfortable position of having some of its lobbyists on the highest offices of the FDA. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel good about having a Monsanto lobbyist making decisions about what kind of food is or isn't safe, or that should or should not be labeled.
Now, we're already out of time. I went past. I'm going to do one more question here, because
Okay.
I think Sam Cedar has a very good one for you. It's also in video form, so let's watch.
Hi, Sam Cedar from the Majority Report. Dr. Stein, I know that you are running to win the presidency, but there are a lot of people who I know who are contemplating voting for the Green Party because they hope that you will reach 5% and qualify for federal matching funds, and then begin to build the Green Party for future elections and across the country. I know there are 100 Green Party officials who are sitting in elected office now, but also over the past 20 years, the number of statewide officials in the Green Party has actually gone down. What I want to know is, do you have a plan to build the Green Party in off-year, non-election years? And if you could tell us what that plan is.
Wonderful question. Thank you. Yes, there is definitely a plan. And I want to underscore that by most recent polls, we are on the threshold of 5% right now. And you can argue that current polling does not tap unlikely voters who are millennials, who are people of color, who are immigrants. So we could, in fact, be at that threshold or potentially even over that threshold. And if word gets out that we can cancel student debt, we could, massively blow past that threshold. But that 5% number, I think, is a minimum transformative goal, because then not only do we have funding with which to really organize in the next election, it also means if we get to 5% that we are on the ballot in most states, so we can actually hit the ground running in these next presidential elections. But the point he makes about organizing right now for the long haul is exactly front and center. And it's one of the major reasons that I am running right now, in order to lift up this agenda, which is not just a global agenda, it's not just a national agenda, this is a local agenda as well, about what our jobs are like, about whether our water supplies are going to be ruined by fracking, about whether we are supporting public higher education and moving to free public higher education, which is what we should have. There is so much we can do, not only at the national level, but also at the local and the state level. There's been an enormous fear campaign, certainly since Bush, Nader, Gore, there's been a fear campaign. But what we've learned is that the politics of fear delivers everything we were afraid of. All the reasons we were told you had to vote for the lesser evil, because you didn't want the expanding wars, you didn't want the meltdown of the climate, you didn't want the war on immigrants, you didn't want the endless expansion of the prison industrial state and the security state. That's exactly what we've gotten by allowing our voices to be silenced and to allow the lesser evil to speak for us. In many ways, the lesser evil paves the way to the greater evil, because people stop coming out to vote for lesser evil politicians and parties that are throwing them under the bus, even if someone else could do it worse. People just stop participating in their democracy when it's so clear that it's not for us. So, in my opinion, this is about standing up for what we need right now. For others who can't quite, buy that, I'd say make the most progressive vote you can and at least register green, contribute green, and then fight very hard for ranked choice voting as your very first action, so that this politics of fear is something we can put behind us and actually begin bringing our moral compass to our democracy. Democracy is not a question of who do we hate the most and who do we fear the most. It's got to be about what is the future that we define for ourselves. So this election is about raising up those local candidates, and I urge you, go to your state Green Party website and find out who's running in your town and support their campaign as well. There are hundreds of candidates for office. Our time has come. I mean, we the people, we deserve a political party that is of, by, and for us. Independent third parties have always led the way, whether it's been in abolition. Remember that the parties of abolition were called spoilers back then. During the effort to abolish slavery, we were called spoilers. The labor movement was led by third parties. The women's movement, throughout our history, transformational change has been led by independent third parties. And in the case of Abraham Lincoln, an independent third party candidate actually rose to power, and that third party became a first party in the course of that election. So our future is there for us to take back in our own hands. Stand up now, like our lives depend on it. Together we are unstoppable. Thank you all for being a part of this.